content loosen the junta's hold on power and push them back to the barracks. So over the next 30 minutes on the show, we're going to be looking in depth into the situation in Myanmar. Our first guest is Debbie Stothard. She's the founder of the democracy advocacy group Alternative ASEAN Network on Burma. Good evening, Debbie. Thanks so much for joining us on the show. So
hi, Melissa. Hi, Sharaad.
After the military refused to honor the elections in 1990 and arrested Aung San Suu Kyi and the leaders of the National League for Democracy, it took Myanmar I think over 20 years to get back on the path to democratic reform. These protests that we're seeing today, Debbie, against the coup, is this going to be yet another long struggle for the country to return to democracy?
I think the feeling of urgency of the protesters, which have actually practically overnight launched a nationwide civil disobedience movement, is that they need to nip this coup in the bud, or else they are going to be stuck with another at least 20 years of military rule, even though General Min Aung Hlaing, who made himself the head of this junta, claims that there will be elections within the year. The reality is that the NLD won the November 2020 general elections with a bigger majority, and the military party lost even more seats. This would have empowered the second-term NLD government to push for genuine reforms instead of compromising with the military as it did during the first term.
Debbie, is that in some sense the heart of the problem? Because the Constitution was written by the military. It favored the military in many, many ways. But did the military find itself in a situation that they created a system that would actually in some ways lock them permanently out of power? The NLD was far too popular, and Aung San Suu Kyi far too charismatic for them to ever take control of governance.
I think first thing we have to understand that what is happening, and this youth-led movement sees this as, although they are calling for the release of Aung San Suu Kyi and the restoration of government to the NLD, which won the election, they see this as bigger than that. This is basically the future of an entire generation, firstly. Secondly, the military stacked the deck against any potential civilian government, and human rights activists have warned about that since 2008 when this constitution was drafted. But the international community kept saying, just hope for gradual change and things will improve gradually. This has not happened. So we do need to listen to the voices of the people who are saying they want this constitution abolished. They are not satisfied with a so-called disciplined democracy, or democracy which is hostage to the military. And they want this military to step back. They want a genuine federal democracy.
Debbie, how likely is it that the military, the armed forces will listen to what the people are saying? You said that they're trying to nip this in the bud before it escalates. Is it likely that the junta will succeed to do that?
I think the fact that the civil disobedient movement, the movement has actually garnered the participation and support of public services, even in the capital of Naypyidaw, where senior public servants to the rank of Director General joined the civil disobedience movement, and where in different parts of the country, the police have even joined the movement and were promptly arrested for doing so. It has shaken General Min Aung Hlaing, and he went on television to say that this will be a kinder, gentler junta, that they will definitely have elections, they're not going to do anything bad. They even promised the international community that they will bring back the Rohingya to Myanmar, and they wanted to keep the country open for investment. But in reality, the pressure the domestic pressure is far more than Senior General Min Aung Hlaing anticipated. And the military as a whole is starting to realize that what is at stake, they're sticking their necks out for the ambition of one person, Min Aung Hlaing, who was supposed to be put out to pasture later this year and would have lost all his economic and political power. That's why he had this coup. It wasn't because of anything else but of fear.
Sorry to interrupt you, Debbie, but I wanted to ask you, why is it different this time around? Why do the protests feel different? Why do the civil disobedience feel different?
The movement is led by young people who are technically savvy, who understand that they need to communicate with each other across the country, across all walks of life, and with the international community. Also, the structure of the economy has changed, who is suffering because of military monopolies. And the international community is starting to wake up to the fact that they need to support genuine change in the country, or else we will continue to see a cycle of coup election.
Debbie, I understand. It's very interesting that you brought up the question of the military's involvement in the economy. I believe they use two conglomerates, to do that. One of this is the Myanmar Economic Holdings, or MEHL, and we already have one businessman, a Singaporean businessman, who's kind of following some sort of, I believe, a social media campaign, has decided to pull out his or cut his ties with the Myanmar military in terms of his investments. What do you see happening? I mean, I don't know how opaque the situation of the military is. Are there fractures within the military that are apparent to observers? Is it likely that, as you say, because this might be perceived as one man's ambition to continue his particular professional life, and so on and so forth, that the military might split? I mean, is there any indication of that? Or is it just wishful thinking?
Well, the UN fact-finding mission in 2019 exposed the military economic monopolies, those military companies, and actually called for them to be sanctioned. And this is a clear case in point, where at least one business person from Singapore has had enough of a conscience and understood that he had an obligation to support his customers who did not want this coup. And when we look at that, if there are targeted economic sanctions against these military companies, then there will be fractures in the military, because they will start to understand that they cannot make profit from this coup.
Right. But will economic sanctions like that work beyond what the international business community can do? I'm looking at countries like New Zealand, for instance, that have suspended all high-level dialogue with Myanmar because of the coup. Are we likely to see more international intervention beyond just condemnation?
We need to have, we need the international community to have guts beyond just statement. They need to follow the example of Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern from New Zealand, who not only said she was cutting ties with the coup, but she was going to make sure that any aid to the country benefited the people and not the military.
Debbie, what else are you seeing in the way in which either the resistance to the coup or the military are trying to maneuver? Do you see the military gaining allies? I know in their accusations of fraud, they had some ethnic parties on their side as well, who also claimed there was fraud in the election. And I believe some political formations might also, representing ethnic minorities, might also be siding with the military at this point in time. How does the game look now in terms of what's the kind of allies and networks that are being formed on either side of this divide?
The main ethnic groups and the main ethnic organizations recognize that they will have a worse deal with a military junta particularly one led by a general that presided over the Rohingya genocide and presided over recent atrocity crimes against Rakhine people in Rakhine State, attacks on civilians in Karen State and in Kachin State and Northern Shan State. So not to mention Chin State. So, they know very well a small handful might be co-opted, they might be seduced by the opportunity of power. But the reality is that the majority of people, regardless of their religion or ethnicity, recognize that this junta is no good for them.
Debbie, are you concerned about the escalation of violence on the side of the armed forces and side of the military? How much violence do you think the military will use to stop these pro-democracy protests?
When we look at the scenes of the protests, the fact that there are LGBT communities, young people, old people, farmers, ordinary people, even civil servants joining, it's 88 uprising, which was shut down brutally by lethal violence by the military. What we are seeing now is, although someone has already been killed and there has been violence, we have seen a certain degree of restraint because of international pressure and international attention. I think it's time for the international community, including countries like the US, and bodies like the Security Council, to take some action, to apply targeted sanctions against the military and make them accountable for what they have done and to prevent them from doing anything worse.
All right, we're going to keep a close eye on the situation as it develops. Debbie, thank you so much for speaking with us tonight. We really do appreciate you helping us put into context what's happening on the ground in Myanmar. Thank you for your time. We're going to come back and discuss this a little more in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned to consider this.
Malaysia akan terus mengekalkan kedudukan kompetitif sebagai destinasi pelaburan dan memudahkan usaha melakukan perniagaan.
We continue to look.
Bila sentuh soal berita, tiada masa untuk tunggu. Kepada anda kami bawakan fakta, susulan dan kupasan yang terkini. Tiada drama dan tiada pengulangan. Usah tunggu lama-lama. AWANI 745 lebih awal dari biasa.
Kini berwajah baru.
Ini pula susulan khas pesawat Back Air di Kazakhstan. Pesawat berkenaan dilaporkan tergelincir 2 kali.
Notifikasi berita terkini dan navigasi mudah. Podcast dikemas kini dengan berita dan program.
Rebirth, Reformasi, Resistance and Hope.
Serta video tanpa had dengan scroll tanpa henti. Buat turun aplikasi baru Astro AWANI sekarang.
Gagalan Kerajaan Persekutuan tunai janji melaksanakan projek baik pulih sekolah Daif turut diulas Menteri Muda Pendidikan dan Penyelidikan Teknologi Dr. Anwar Rapai.
COVID-19, 2 lagi kes disyaki atau PUI direkodkan di Sarawak.
So hopefully kita akan mendapat kedudukan yang lebih baik di masa-masa akan datang.
Udang geragau atau bubuk dalam bahasa tempatan terkenal sebagai bahan utama dalam pembuatan belacan atau cencaluk.
Amanah di tangan kita. Adat, budaya dan semangat menjadi kesinambungan perpaduan tanah air yang tercinta. Berteraskan adab yang terpahat di jiwa dan raga. Marilah bersama kita membina negara Malaysia. Bila sentuh soal berita, tiada masa untuk tunggu. Kepada anda kami bawakan fakta, susulan dan kupasan yang terkini. Tiada drama dan tiada pengulangan. Usah tunggu lama-lama. AWANI 745 lebih awal dari biasa.
Kini berwajah baru.
Ini pula susulan khas pesawat back air di Kazakhstan. Pesawat berkenaan dilaporkan tergelincir 2 kali.
Notifikasi berita terkini dan navigasi mudah.
Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. With me is Sharaad Kuttan. We continue our look at the situation in Myanmar some 10 days after the military coup. Now, in the past few days, tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets despite a ban on protests there. Joining us now, we have Maung Zarni. He is the co-founder of the NGO Forces of Renewal Southeast Asia, that's based in the UK. Zarni, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us today. You were the founder of the Free Burma Coalition back in the mid-90s that brought an international spotlight on Myanmar when it was still under military rule. How would you compare the conditions today to back then in terms of international pressure to shape domestic political dynamics?
Well, obviously, back in the 1990s, when we started working on boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign that the Palestinian support have adopted in the last 10 years, China was not a powerful a player as today. But that said, the Western, powers, particularly economic powerhouses, and European Union, as well as the United States, they remain, perhaps the most important external actors that can help shape the developments in the country, providing that when they say they support democratization, they really mean it.
Zarni, I want to ask you, since you brought up the question of the West and China, and to some extent India, are these countries at kind of polar opposites in terms of international responses to the coup? And how do you think the military will use these in terms of negotiating space for itself?
Well, I think, India and China are two most important players in terms of economic and perhaps in the case of India, a geopolitical cloud. Then we've got, Japan, and we've got South Korea. But I think on the broader question, these powers, vis-a-vis the United States, they differ on the strength or the strength of value or convictions as to spreading this liberal ideas. But I think broadly speaking, it appears that this coup is not really welcome even by China itself. There were analyses coming out of India written by Indian the national security types writers. They think that maybe this coup is supported, if not openly, but tacitly, by the national security establishment in Delhi that felt that Aung San Suu Kyi did not treat them fairly vis-a-vis China. And so at the moment, the picture is not as clear-cut as it seems. Naturally, many of us think that China is going to go along with any democratic regression, because that will mean that Western powers would sanctions and come up with other punitive measures, creating space for China to spread even greater influence with the Burmese generals. In terms of the Burmese generals and how much wiggle room they have now, I think the fundamental difference is that Burma is subject to multiple judicial processes. The International Court of Justice case filed by the state of Gambia on grounds that Myanmar has violated its terms and obligations under the Genocide Convention. That's proceeding. Yeah, that's not going to go back. And there seems to be an overwhelming, the evidence, at least on the face of what has been presented to the ICJ, right, that Myanmar may have, committed a genocide. Sorry, Melissa.
Sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to ask you whether you think that international, the intervention by the international community would loosen the junta's hold on power, or is it going to come from internal, from civil discontent, from popular discontent, from civil disobedience that we're seeing tens of thousands of people on the streets in the past 5 days? Where is that going to put pressure on the junta and its hold on power?
I think obviously any type of democratization or national liberation movement will have dependent on or driven by the people themselves, and that's there. But I think it would be wrong empirically and conceptually to say that only the Burmese can change the political situation. That's not true, because even the junta itself knows that it needs friends and allies and supporters to either keep quiet or to adhere to ASEAN principle of non-interference, or to keep the flow of the foreign investment coming. So that's why the junta's already made attempts to placate Bangladesh, to placate immediate neighbors such as Thailand. And so the junta knows that it has to, while getting ready to crack down on this groundswell of nationwide opposition against the coup, it is also trying to incentivize countries like Bangladesh using the Rohingya repatriation as an incentive.
Zarni, what about the internal coherence of the military itself? I mean, there are those who argue that the General Min Aung Hlaing is pushing this agenda because he was to retire this year, middle of this year. Do you think they all are the same mind with regard to this coup? Is there any chance of the military splitting and therefore leading to the failure of the coup?
It's really a $6 million question, Sharaad, because, if you look at 1986 anti-Marcos uprising, or the Suharto, the Marsi, the attempt to overthrow Suharto regime, there's always, a few key military leaders within the, existing the establishment, either in Jakarta or Manila. I mean, I had long and close relations with former President Fidel Ramos. Ramos was the head of the constabulary in in the Philippines. He switched side to the so that made a major difference. And the same with Indonesian situation under Suharto military dictatorship. I'm not sure if we have a similarly significant split within the top echelon of the Burmese military. I think no military coup can be explained using only personal interests of the number one general. Military coups are essentially institutional acts triggered by a combination of personal interest, agendas of different generals, and the interest of the military as an institution. But it is a very, very crucial question. But at this point, I cannot gauge whether the top will split. If that happens, and then with the serious external support from the United States, European Union, and even within ASEAN, like Malaysia or Indonesia, the Burmese democracy movement on the ground can really make a difference in this coup. But at this point, I haven't seen any signs that the junta's top echelon is about to split.
All right. Can I ask you about Aung San Suu Kyi's party, the National League for Democracy? What role do you see for them now in perhaps trying to reverse this military coup? Now that most of their leaders have been arrested, can they lead the civil disobedience?
Well, they are not leading the civil disobedience, obviously. She left not even an audio visually recorded message to the public that should be broadcast. She should have done it, but she didn't do it. She just dictated half a page of urging people not to accept it because she expected it about 3 or 4 days before the coup actually took place. I think we need to start seeing the NLD and NLD leadership not so much as democratizers, but as transitional figures and transitional institution, because it is actually the new generation activists on the ground that have tasted a degree of cultural and intellectual and even political freedoms during the limited reforms over the past 10 years. And also this movement, CDM, Civil Disobedience Movement as it is known, enjoys an overwhelming support of very diverse electorate. And so I think there is a high degree of organic people's participation. It's no longer about Aung San Suu Kyi. It's not even about the National League for Democracy. It is about the hopes and aspirations of the overwhelming Burmese majority that, given a chance, always vote for non-military parties in the last 4 elections over the last 30 years.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight, Zarni. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you to both of you.
Thank you. That's all the time we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
Don't forget to get the latest news on the AstroAwani.com and the Astro AWANI app, and you can find more information on the COVID-19 vaccines there as well. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.